Call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Moore? Aye. Mrs. Thompson? Here. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Mr. Bittner?
Here.
Mr. Shaboo?
Here.
Mr. Lunder?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here. Approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of council, April 11th, 2023. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Motion for approval.
Motion made by Mr. Morris, seconded by Mr. Shaboo for approval. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Moore? Aye. Mrs. Thompson? Abstain. Mr. Morris?
Aye.
Mr. Bittner?
Aye.
Mr. Shaboo?
Aye.
Mr. Lunder?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye. Correspondence. Clerk, is there any correspondence this evening?
I have no correspondence tonight.
Does any member of council have correspondence this evening? Hearing none, we will move on to administrative and department head reports. Mayor and Safety Director, Mr. Eva, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Johnson, members of council, the public here this evening. Start off with Al Busher's resigned from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Al spent many years on the Board of Zoning Appeals and also the Planning and Zoning Commission. I want to thank Al for his many years of volunteer service to the city. Brandon Towns has relocated outside of Mentor-on-the-Lake. Brandon served on our Civil Service Commission along with the Board of Zoning Appeals. I want to also thank Brandon for his volunteer service to the city. If anyone knows of anyone interested in a volunteer position on either Planning and Zoning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, or the Civil Service Commission, please have them send me a letter of interest. Also tomorrow, from 1:30 to 2:30, Jenny Costanza will be here from NOPEC to answer any questions that residents would have. We've also posted this out on Facebook and the city's website. That concludes my report tonight.
Good. Thank you, Administrative Director, Mr. Ness. Good evening.
So I'm proud to say I have one more piece to subject for the audit that will be completed. Except for when they come in, so that will be coming. They are working on, they started this week on the concrete road in Goldenrod, Larsburg, and they started grinding on the asphalt on Thunderbird. So, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Law Director, Mr. Lyons, good evening.
Good evening. I have no report. Thank you.
Okay. City Engineer, good evening.
Good evening. Short report tonight. Ohio Public Works Commission applications are due end of May, so in about a month. So we haven't talked about it in depth, but I think our plan would be to reapply for Southwest Storm Sewer with renewed efforts to correct the funding. Last year's strategy was come in last place, and we accomplished that goal, which was to try and get the maximum amount of outside funding to match the local funds. And we didn't do bad, but we were trying to get more like a 60% grant, I think, for members. So we did sharpen our pencil this year and try to come in just above the line. So we're just going to avoid sponsoring too much. So that's that subject. I don't know if this is appropriate time to discuss Sunset Park, like Overlook Beach Park revetment.
Sure.
But I'm happy to discuss that. So last year we prepared a cost estimate of about $1.1 million project cost. That was based on prices at the time. I really didn't have any new prices to adjust the estimate, although we know prices haven't gone down anytime in the past 2 years, drastically go up. But I felt confident enough that we didn't need to change the estimate. And then since then I prepared a more detailed engineering fee estimates to present for discussion and Be appropriate at this time or to get the SID funding to at least prepare design and go after permits. So question on that process.
Okay, are there any questions from council they would like to ask regarding the engineering fee estimate for the project at this point? Could you walk us through the engineering fee estimate a little bit there?
Yeah, so the city engineer contract is a percent fee basis, so you develop, at this point, all we have is the estimate until we have bids and answers to be more concrete. And so based on that, primarily the design portion is based on percent of construction, something in the range of 7% of construction costs. And then it is split 85% towards the design aspect and 15% towards construction administration. And then that contract also involves hourly services for things like surveying, permit application process, things of that nature, so outside of the actual design of the feature itself, whether it's a storm sewer or a structure. So that adds up to about $100,000 for the design portion. I think that would be the most appropriate thing to do, and then either bid the project and then see what construction comes in and see where we are at that point, and then look at the construction part of it.
And you guys would handle the bidding process, right?
Right, so at this point, the plan will be to process through the SID, which create complications in its own right. Permitting can take months, months, and months. Our strategy would be to try to go for an emergency permit, which is been done by a lot of residents, where the claim structure is at risk, and build the thing based on normal engineering standards, and then follow up with ODNR permitting later, which can be a lengthy and complicated process. So the only other thing I point out is we are kind of lucky our neighbors helped us out on both sides of the department by coming past the property lines to protect their own property. So we're feeling pretty precise gap. It's actually less than the frontage, the way the frontage is. So.
Yes, Mr. London.
Is there a deadline on the SID application?
Well, there is, but there's multiple, so they have different bonds due at different times, and we can get in line. I think our project is probably one of the smaller ones, believe it or not, at $1 million. So we could fit into certain, every 6 months or so, there might be a new opportunity. So we try to get in earliest. Mostly revolved around the length of the permit process.
Because it looks like we lost another 5 feet over
The one thing I didn't do on the way here is stop just to do a daily view, but the whole thing is shocking. The base of the cliff, I'll call it, is about 10 feet above lake level. And it is shocking to see that level of damage. Awesome. One other thing I'll point out on the process, we're not allowed to reclaim land for current ODNR rules. But basically, we'd have to start at the top of the bluff now and then build, the typical slope that you see for that built that. So wherever that ended up, that base, below lake level, would be what we're stuck with for the location. We're kind of in a cove, so we'd probably build up beach if there wasn't beach, then we're still.
Thank you.
As far as the funding too, Mr. Munger, Mrs. Bartone handles all of that for the county, the SID financing, and they are in phase 2, which is a whole, another bond or however they're going to finance that. So we're going to be in on phase 2 if we get this.
Thank you.
You said it's apply for the 6 month.
Yes, we should get in line. Yeah, get our foot in the door, get in line.
Other questions from members of council? Yes, sir.
On the back page of this, the actual, quote, to do the job, there's units there. I understand LS might be, I don't know, linear system. I'm not even sure. CY could be cubic yards. What are the rest of those?
Sure, as far as the top, LS is lump sum, so that's anything that's, just an overall lump amount for the whole project. Where
Okay.
it's not necessarily a way to measure it conveniently. CY definitely cubic yards, that's why square yards. LF is linear feet. And that's the extent of the nomenclature, so apologize for the shortcut there, but that's pretty common.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions this evening?
Could I
Sure.
ask Jim's question?
Better than anyone I know.
Maybe it's for the benefit of the audience, to my task. Meadow on the Lake has never participated in a city project they're selling. So, we apply to the CID, and we get included in the bond, and then it's that bond that then pays not only for the construction, but also for the design work. Is that how that works?
Yeah, we cover a project.
Right, okay, including the design work, and then that bond then would be over, a 20-year period or whatever period that bond would be. So that, with interest, and so the city would then be paying, whatever the total project cost is divided by 20, that's 20-year bond, correct? That's correct, okay, so by that estimate that you have there today, that's not money that that has to be appropriated this year in order to pay CT. Instead, it would be part of the CID process, okay, in terms of borrowing that money. Is that all correct here?
Yeah, and that's something we'll have to talk to the county about as far as the time. So, until you have bids,
Right,
construction is the highest, largest portion of the
right,
project. Right, to have a plan,
right.
whether you can, the city has money to fund the design costs and then include that in the project later. That's one possibility. That's
Okay.
common, another thing, I'm not sure that,
Okay.
I'll just say.
So it could be paid, just out of the general fund now and not included in the bond, but it would be an option to have it in the bond, depending on just the CID process itself, correct?
That's my understanding, and that's probably the first question for how we do it.
Okay. I was just wondering about the process. Not at all.
And I know the CID financing is 15 years. And the way it's been explained is it almost be, we would get a bill from the county. Similar to an assessment on the property, and we would pay that. Back.
It would actually be an assessment on Mineral Beach Park, it would be included in our taxes. The same way that when the city assesses the property, it gets included in the tax, which is special assessment. And that makes it a tax-free bond.
Have a time on anything, when we start or on the part, we look at this year or by agreement?
If we can get this through, emergency or fast-paced permit, then we definitely will start this year. There's a lot of work to do, even without, or even with a delayed permit, but potentially it's.
Any other questions? Yes.
This is to, I know this is the shore up the shoreline, but does this include any access for residents if they would want to get down to like that beachy area or down near lake level? Or is this just strictly to shore it up and stop the erosion?
The base idea is to just shore up the shoreline. Ideally, there would be some kind of access, because we've had that in the past. So whether that's just grading into the rock revetment to allow access, it's not something I don't think we want to advertise. There would never be a safe park, walk in the park. But people are gonna find their way if there's something to that base of it. So I'd like to see some kind of feature there beyond just a. Love to see it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. Bittner?
So just if I'm understanding, you said the revetment would start with a cliff ends right now, correct? We couldn't go any further out.
Correct, that's the,
So it's gonna be back all the way to where the cliff is.
correct, the top, right, we'd start at the top and have a slope down from there. That's, we keep hoping that ODNR changes their pattern, because someone could lose 200 feet of
Right, that's
land
already
and not
back.
be able to reclaim, that's the current rule.
Okay. That changes what we looked at. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, any questions for the administration in general? Hearing none. We'll move on to board committee commission reports. Parks and Recreation.
Park and Recs met on Thursday, March 30th. Bree Moon was nominated as chair for the Park and Rec. And Carol Stefanski was voted as vice chair. They have changed the timing of the fall festival for this coming up year. They also asked all the members on the committee to submit different ideas and to have examples of different things that we can do in the city for the community, for the residents, for the children. So that will be presented at our next meeting. And then we adjourned.
Thank you. Community Development Committee.
Yes, Mr. President, we met on April 13th at 7 p.m. The purpose was to discuss the proposal of the city master plan. Present was myself, Councilman Bittner, yourself, Rob Johnson, and there were many residents. There were like 9 or 10 residents there. The meeting started a few minutes late. A review was done of our progress on a proposed mission statement and vision statement. After a couple of modifications, it was decided by the group that these statements are good going forward. A review was made of zoning changes over the past several years. It was put together by one of the residents. A lengthy discussion followed to identify some of our trouble areas. They included, but are not limited to, the city website information, business district, as well as recreational areas. A discussion was held on if this group could or should continue to work on the plan. It was decided that we should encourage council and the administration to hire a company to complete this project based on the amount of time needed to complete the process. I'm working on setting up a meeting to discuss some of these things with the city administrator and or the mayor. Mr. Schick and Mr. Cleveland wish to attend as well, and we adjourned at 8:30.
Zoning Committee.
Yes, we met on April 17th, started at 7 p.m. The purpose of the meeting was code 1264, the Yacht Club District. In attendance with myself, Mr. Councilman Lunder, Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Moore, Rob Johnson, Paul Moore, Fred Moore, and the resident Chris Timmons. After a discussion, the committee agreed to keep code 1264 club district the same with no changes. Any complaints pertaining to noise, specifically the muffler noise on any boats, as per 670.30, the committee recommends that the police department forward them to the Lake County Sheriff's Office and or the Coast Guard. We adjourned at 7:08.
Okay. Thank you. Were there any other boards or committees that met? We don't have a list here tonight. Hearing none. We'll move on to open to the public to speak. This is your opportunity to come to the lectern, state your name and address for the record. Your opportunity to speak to council. It is not a back and forth discussion with council. So if you would like to speak, please do so.
Hello, my name is Earl Curris, 7523 Salida Road. I guess the reason I'm up here is the situation with the park and handing CT Consultants $100,000. I'm a little bit concerned. I would love to see some concepts before that kind of money gets spent. So that we, as a community, can truly get what we want in that park, design the park the way we want, and actually have an impact in our city. I'm just afraid that we're gonna throw more money away, and at the end of the day, get stuck with whatever is handed to us, and it just concerns me. I think to spend $100,000 without even some concepts scares the heck out of me. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Bill Cleveland, 7607 Salida Road. I just wanted to add to Earl's comments. I'm very pleased that there is action being taken in connection with that unstabilizing that. And actually making the city have access to the lake, so that we do access. Whatever we're going to do. I will say that I am shocked by the cost of the so-called design work and administration project. I think that is very high, $100,000 or so. There are two preeminent contractors in the area that do this work, Haynes and Humphrey. And typically for a significant project, the design, this is not an unusual project in any way. The only unusual part is the process we have to go through to approve the project. The money part and the actual work is very ordinary. And the Haynes and Humphrey typically include the design work and the events in the cost. And the cost of last fall was in the ballpark of $1,200 to $1,400 during the fall. So I'm still struggling a little bit with the cost line. And I think we need to be very careful before we commit spending that kind of money, which we know for sure is necessary.
Okay. Anyone else? Hearing none, we will close this portion of the meeting to the public. We'll move on to legislation for council. Ordinance number 2022-0-05. That is still assigned to the Planning and Zoning Commission, so that will stay there. Ordinance number 2023-0-06. That's still assigned to the Ordinance Committee. That will stay there. Ordinance number 2023-0-07. That's assigned to the Ordinance Committee, and that will still stay there. Ordinance number 2023-0-08. If you please read it by its title,
Sure.
since we can do something.
Ordinance number 2023-0-08. An ordinance extending the existing 6-month moratorium on the acceptance and processing of applications for zoning and or occupancy permit approvals for elderly apartments in the area designated as the RTARP area and the Mentor on the Lake zoning ordinances, and the issuance of such approvals in the city of Mentor on the Lake for a period of 2 months and declaring an emergency.
So since the RTARP modifications are still with the Planning and Zoning Commission, we need to pass a moratorium in order to wait out that period until they've had a chance to look at it. So is there any motion to suspend the rules?
So made.
Second,
Made by Mr. Morris, seconded by Mrs. Thompson. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Moore,
Aye.
Mrs. Thompson.
Aye.
Mr. Morris,
Aye.
Mr. Bittner,
No.
Mr. Shaboo,
Aye.
Mr. Lunder,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Motion for passage.
second,
Motion made by Mr. Morris, seconded by Mrs. Thompson for passage. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Moore. Aye. Mrs. Thompson,
aye,
Mr. Morris,
Aye.
Mr. Bittner,
No.
Mr. Shaboo,
Aye.
Mr. Lunder,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye. Old business. Is there any old business tonight? Yes.
Just a question, Mr. Landon. Sir, is there any way, I mean, I know there was a lot of discussion about the revetment down at Nova Park. Is there any way of getting some kind of a drawing or anything, what this thing will look like after you're done, after this is done?
Yeah, I think there was a preliminary report done a few years ago. I haven't changed much other than the shoreline is pretty bad, but I could distribute that.
That would be great, because it would probably reduce a lot of confusion and questions. Is there a way to get that emailed out to council?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any old business? Hearing none, we'll move on to new business. Discussion, summer recess. Is there a proposal for a summer recess?
Mr. President, I suggest we do the same thing we did last year. I believe we took the last meeting of July and the last meeting of August.
It would have been the first meeting of July and the first meeting of August.
Okay. So be it.
Any other discussion on that? Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Motion made by Mr. Morris to take
I'll
the first the second. Take the first meeting of July and the first meeting of August off. So have the second meeting of July and the second meeting of August. Seconded by Mr. Shaboo. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Moore,
Aye.
Mrs. Thompson,
Aye.
Mr. Morris,
Aye.
Mr. Bittner,
Aye.
Mr. Shaboo,
Aye.
Mr. Lunder,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Heck, no. Open to the public to speak, unless there's any other new business. Is there any other new business? Yes.
I have a couple ordinances, I'm requesting the ordinance committee to take a look at. So ordinance 452.17A1 has to do with, that's in the traffic code. We don't actually have one in zoning. So wondering if we can get that added as they would the driveway, right away and the width.
Could you give us that ordinance again, please?
Yes, it's 452.17A1.
Thank you, sir.
And then I have one more, it has to do with rear yard area. And that's, it's an accessory building, so that is ordinance 1252.15. We don't have an ordinance, limiting the occupied area of the rear yard. Or some do, so some cities have a fine force based. Buildings can't be more than 30% of the rear yard area or less than 750 square feet.
Any other new business? Okay, we'll move on to open the public to speak. Ken, your opportunity to come to the lectern, state your name and address for the record, your opportunity to speak to us.
Good evening, thank you. Jeff Schick, Salida Road. I'm really pleased to hear the lakefront property question there in the wall. And I know that Mr. Morris has asked to see that material. Can it be sent to citizens also? Can I give you my email address? Or is that valuable? That'd be great. Yeah, there are a number of us that have, Mr. Morris, I'm sure you know, a number of us have built walls along the lake from one end of Leonard Lake to the other, and we have an awful lot of experience and maybe can bring some insight to the project. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, we'll close this portion of the meeting. And we will move on to announcements and setting the meetings. Planning and Zoning Commission is not meeting Monday, May 1st. Has been canceled. Next regular agenda meeting is Thursday, May 4th at 6 p.m. Next regular meeting of council is Tuesday, May 9th at 7 p.m. What committees are meeting?
Ordinance, May 2nd.
Ordinance, May 2nd.
The room is open.
That's a Tuesday,
Yes, sir.
at what time?
7.
Good for me.
Ordinance Committee, Tuesday, May 2nd at 7 p.m.
That's 6.
Agenda will be the two ordinances given tonight, And then we will review the other two that we completed to send back to council right away and rental inspection.
Any other committees?
Parks and Recreation Board is meeting this Thursday, the 27th, 7 p.m.
Parks and Rec, 7 p.m. on the 27th. Any other committees? You look like you guys should be doing more work.
We're working on it.
Okay, well, hearing no more committees, I'm disappointed by that, by the way, but. Is there a motion for adjournment? Made by Mr. Morris,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Thompson. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Moore,
Aye.
Mrs. Thompson,
Aye.
Mr. Morris,
Aye.
Mr. Bittner,
Aye.
Mr. Shaboo,
Aye.
Mr. Lunder,
Right.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye. This meeting is adjourned.